This afternoon, I will talk about compassion for animals in the Orthodox Church. As I'm sitting here in my flat, surrounded by my icons, I think of two Russian icons that I have not far away. The first is an icon that shows St. Florus and St. Laurus. At the top of the icon is the Archangel Michael, and on either side of him the two saints. Then below there is a concourse of horses, old and young. Some have riders, some are riderless but with saddle and bridle, and others are running about freely. Now, I'm not sure what is the connection between horses and these two stonemasons who died as martyrs at Constantinople in the early 4th century. But the horses are there, prominently depicted in the icon, and their presence gives me continuing pleasure. Beside my bed, I have another icon that shows the leading Russian saint of the 19th century, Seraphim of Sarov. He is seated on a log outside his wooden cabin in the forest, with his prayer rope in one of his hands, while with the other hand he's offering a piece of bread to a huge brown bear. Great was the surprise and alarm of visitors to the saint's hermitage when they came upon him in the company of his four-footed friend Misha. Now, for members of the Orthodox Church, the icon is not to be thought of simply as a picture on a religious subject, as a decorative item designed to give pleasure. Much more significant is the fact that an icon forms part of an act of prayer and worship. If you separate the icon from this context of prayer and worship, then it ceases to be, in the true and full sense, a holy icon. Now, if then we choose to include the animals as well as humans in our icons, this makes it clear that the animals are part of our prayer and worship. We are not saved from the world, but with the world. And therefore, the animals share with us the path of salvation. We do not forget that when Jesus withdrew to pray for 40 days in the wilderness, he had animals as his companions. As it says in the Gospel of Mark, he was with the wild beasts. Now, what these icons make clear, that animals are part of our prayer and worship. This is confirmed by the prayer books used in the Orthodox Church. If we look at the main act of worship, the service of the Eucharist, we are at first disappointed, because though the Divine Liturgy emphasizes that we offer back to God the whole of creation, it doesn't specifically mention the animals. Yet when we pray at the beginning of the liturgy for the peace of the whole world, this surely includes the animal creation. As one commentator puts it, Father Lev Gillet, we pray for the peace of the universe, not only for mankind, but for every creature, for animals and plants, for the stars and all of nature. But when we turn from the Eucharist to our daily prayers, then we do find that the animals have an important place. Now, the new day on the ancient understanding of time, still preserved in the Orthodox Church, begins not at midnight, not at dawn, but in the evening. As it says in the Genesis account of creation, the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening comes first. So the first service of the new day is Vespers. It's not an epilogue, but a prologue. And how do we begin this first service of the day, Vespers? Throughout the year, except during the week after Easter, we always start Vespers in the same manner. We sing or read Psalm 103, in the Hebrew numbering 104. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you have become exceedingly glorious. You are praised with glory and honor. So the psalm continues, mentioning all the wonders and variety of creation. We start the new day by offering the creation back to God, offering back to God this cosmic temple full of variety and beauty, where God has given us to dwell. And in the course of Psalm 103, alias 104, the Psalm of Introduction, we have lots to say about the animals. We speak of the streams that run among the hills, how the animals drink from them, the wild asses quench their thirst. We speak of the birds of the air in their habitations, singing among the branches of the trees. We speak of the great sea with the great sea monster in it called Leviathan, and that is probably the whale. And we mention other things as well. Cattle, storks, wild goats, badgers, young lions. So, starting the new day, offering the creation back to the Creator, rejoicing with thanksgiving because of all the beauty and wonder of this world in which we dwell. It is a fallen world, yes, but it's also still a world full of beauty. We stress then the place of the animals. We bless God for the sun and moon, for the clouds and wind, for the earth and water, but we bless him also for the living creatures in all their diversity and abundance with which he has peopled the globe. We do not live as humans alone in the world. We have animal companions all around us. And if we forget about that because we live in cities, that is a great tragedy, because without our links to the animals, we are not fully human. So that's how we start the new day in our Orthodox worship, rejoicing in our companions, the animals. And if we look at the book of prayers in the Orthodox Church, what is called in Greek the Evkologion and in Slavonic the Trebnik, we shall find lots of special prayers for animals. That is hardly surprising. After all, until today, the great majority of Orthodox have lived In the countryside, they have been farmers, and so the animals are very important to them, the domestic animals. So we find prayers for the good health of sheep, goats, and cattle, of horses, donkeys, and mules, even for bees and silkworms. And on the negative side, there are prayers for protection from poisonous snakes and noxious insects. Here's a prayer from a blessing on bees. In ancient times, O Lord, you granted to the Israelites a land flowing with milk and honey, and you were well pleased to nourish your Baptist John with wild honey in the wilderness. Now also, providing in your good pleasure for our sustenance, do you bless the beehives in this apiary? Greatly increase the multiplication of bees inside them, preserving them by your grace and granting us an abundance of rich honey. A prayer for silkworms includes these words: O good King, show us even now your loving kindness, as you blessed the well of Jacob and the pool of Siloam and the cup of your holy apostles. So bless these silkworms, and as you multiplied the stars in heaven and the sand beside the seashore, so multiply these silkworms, granting them health and strength, and may they feed without coming to any harm, so that they provide shrouds of pure silk to your glory and praise. Yet not all the prayers for animals are as genial as this, for there also are exorcisms directed against the creatures which in this fallen world inflict harm on us humans and on our produce. Here's an example. I adjure you, O creatures of many forms, worms, caterpillars, beetles and cockroaches, mice, grasshoppers and locusts, and insects of various kinds, flies and moles and ants, gadflies and wasps, and centipedes and millipedes. Injure not the vineyard, field, garden, trees, or vegetables of this your servant. And here the person offering the prayer mentions his name. But be gone into the wild hills and into the barren trees that God has given you for sustenance. It will be noted here that we do not actually pray here for the destruction of these baneful creatures, but only that they should depart to their proper homes and cease to molest us. Actually, later on in the same prayer, which I've quoted, it is said that if these creatures fail to obey the command to depart to their own place, may God kill you with pigs, and birds also will be sent by my prayers to devour you. However, that's only if they won't go to their proper home. Even rats, hornets, and spiders have their appointed place in God's dispensation. When I'm annoyed by mosquitoes and tempted to kill them, I reflect that we humans, despite all our scientific advances, despite all the complex machines that we make, are quite unable to produce anything exactly like a mosquito. So perhaps we shouldn't destroy them, though that's a moot point. Here is a more cheerful prayer by St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain. or was it lived in the 18th century, expressing tenderness and compassion for the animals. Lord Jesus Christ, moved by your tender mercy, take pity on the suffering animals. For if a righteous man takes pity on the souls of his cattle, that's a quotation from Proverbs, how should you not take pity on them? For you created them and you provide for them. In your compassion, you did not forget the animals in the ark. Through the good health and plentiful number of oxen and other four-footed beasts, the earth is cultivated and its fruits increase. And your servants who call upon your name enjoy in full abundance the produce of their farming. Now, there are many other prayers for animals in our service books, but that's enough to show that our prayers are not just anthropocentric, centered on human beings, but they embrace the whole created order. We humans are bound to God and to one another in a cosmic covenant that also includes all the other living creatures on the face of the earth. As it says in the prophet Hosea, I will make for you a covenant with the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the ground. So, yes, we are not saved from the world, but with the world, with the animals. I'm thinking here, when I use the phrase cosmic covenant, of the admirable book by the late Father Robert Murray called The Cosmic Covenant, Biblical Themes of Justice, Peace, and the Integrity of Creation. And this cosmic covenant is not something made up by us humans, but it has its source in the divine realm. It is conferred upon us as a gift from God. A striking illustration of this covenant bond is to be seen in the custom that once prevailed in the Russian countryside. Perhaps it still continues today. Returning from the Easter midnight service with the newly kindled holy fire, the farmers used to go into the stables with their lighted candle or lantern, and they greeted the horses and cattle with the Paschal salutation, Christ is risen. The victory of the risen Saviour over the forces of death and darkness has meaning not for us humans alone, but for the animals as well. For them also Christ has died and risen again. As we say in the Easter midnight service, now all things are filled with joy. Saint Nicodemus, in the prayer that I quoted earlier, cites the words of Proverbs 12:10. The righteous man shows pity for the souls of his cattle. Does this mean that animals have souls? The answer depends on what precisely we mean by the soul. The word psyche in the ancient world had a wider application than that which is customarily given in the present day to our word soul. Aristotle, for example, distinguishes three levels of soul: the vegetable, the animal, and the human. According to the Aristotelian scheme, the vegetable or nutritive soul has the capacity for growth, but not for movement or sensation. Here he would have been thinking, for example, of tomatoes or cabbages. The animal soul has the capacity for movement and sensation, but, according to Aristotle, not conscious thought or reason. Only the human soul is endowed with self-knowledge and the power of logical thinking. So you see, therefore, Aristotle, psyche means in an inclusive fashion all expressions of life force and vital energy, whereas we today tend to limit soul to the human soul. If we today were to speak of potatoes or cucumbers having souls, we should doubtless be considered facetious. But Aristotle was not trying to make a joke. Employing the soul in a restricted sense, as denoting specifically the self-reflective rational soul, most thinkers in the West, and on the whole in the Christian East as well, have denied that animals are ensouled. At the beginning of the modern era, early 17th century, the philosopher Descartes considered animals to be simply intricate machines, automata. On such a view, there is a clear demarcation between human beings and the animal world. Humans alone, it is said, are created in God's image, and they alone possess immortality, in contrast to the beasts that perish. In modern Greek, the horse is called allogon, meaning lacking logos or reason. Animals, so it's claimed, cannot form abstract concepts, and so they are unable to construct logical arguments. They lack personal freedom and the faculty of moral choice, for they cannot discern between good and evil, but act solely by instinct. Yet, are we in fact justified in making such an emphatic division between ourselves and the other animals? Many of the characteristics that we tend to regard as distinctively human are also to be found, to a varying extent, in the animals as well. For example, if you put a banana inside a cage, and the cage has a rather intricate device by which the door is closed, and then you put a monkey in front of the cage, he will twist the door, the handle of the door, this way and that, trying to get the door open. And he's clearly thinking, now, how can I manage to make this door work? So he's doing something very similar to what a human would do, confronted with a door that we can't open. Animals, as well as humans, solve problems. Or again, consider the way in which animals, wild animals as well as domestic animals, are led to mate and to care for their offspring. This surely indicates that they possess understanding. Animals have memory. If you've maltreated a horse, whipped and beaten him, and he meets you years later, he will probably remember you and show fear and distress. More importantly, animals show love for one another. They are, in many cases, monogamous, which is more than we can say of most humans. When animals lose their life companion, they display all the signs of grief that a human would show. Well, we may say animals don't possess the power of articulate speech. Let's not be too quick there. Animals have their own sign language by which they communicate to one another. In some cases, this sign language is quite sophisticated, as in the case of dolphins. Animals may not use tools in the way that humans do, but they don't simply exist in the world. They actively adapt the environment to their needs. Birds build nests. Beavers construct dams. Bees indeed form complex communities with different tasks assigned to different members. Nor is it would seem that animals can sometimes display visionary awareness, perceiving things to which humans are blind. Take the story of Balaam's ass in Numbers chapter 22. The donkey sees the angel of the Lord blocking the pathway with a drawn sword, whereas Balaam himself is unaware of the angel's presence. As investigators of the paranormal have often discovered, animals react to unseen presences in places reputed to be haunted. May it not be claimed that animals possess, at least in a rudimentary form, psychic insight and a capacity for spiritual intuition. Instead of making a sharp separation between animals and human beings, would it not be wiser to keep in view the kinship that links us together? Surely we should speak of the unity of all living things, sharing, as they do, the same life force. Plants, animals, and humankind belong to a single integrated structure of creation. We and animals are interdependent. We are members of one another. The world is variegated, yet everywhere interconnected. At school, my history master used to say, "It all ties up, you see. It all ties up." That's a good way of teaching people history, but it's also a good way of looking at the world. Can we be sure that animals don't possess immortality? How do we know? Certainly, in descriptions of the age to come, in, for example, the prophet Isaiah, animals have their place. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the young lion together, and a little child shall lead them. Isaiah chapter 11. When Martin Luther, distressed by the death of his pet dog, was asked whether there would be animals in heaven, he replied, "There will be little dogs with golden hair, shining like precious stones." Sometimes we're told, all right, there may be animals in the future life, but they won't be the same animals. How do we know? Friendship and love contain within themselves an element of eternity. For us to say to another human person, "I love you," to say it with all our heart, that is to say by implication, you will never die. And if this is true of our love for fellow humans, may it not be true of our love for animals? Although we are not to love animals in exactly the same way as we love our fellow humans, yet those of us who have experienced the deeply therapeutic effect of a companion animal when we are ill will certainly recognize that our reciprocal relationship contains within itself intimations of immortality. Even if the animals are not ensouled, yet they are undoubtedly sentient. They have feelings. They are responsive and vulnerable. Descartes is surely wrong. Animals are not machines. They are not commodities that we can exploit just as we wish, as we might do with a typewriter. But they have their God-given life, their individuality, their personality. We should regard animals as gifts, gifts to us from God. And we are responsible before God for the way we treat his gifts. Cruelty, it has been said, is atheism, and that includes cruelty to the animals. I think here of some words in Dostoevsky's masterwork, The Brothers Karamazov. Love the animals. God has given them the rudiments of thought and untroubled joy. Do not trouble it. Do not torment them. Do not go against God's purpose. Man, do not exalt yourself above the animals. They are sinless, and you, with all your grandeur, defile the earth through your appearance on it, and leave traces of your defilement behind you. Alas, this is true of almost every one of us. Speaking as a member of the Orthodox Church, of course I do not wish to be complacent. We have in the Orthodox Church, as has also the Christian West, a rich theology of the animal creation. But I'm afraid in the East, as in the West, there is a sad gap between theory and practice. I wouldn't claim that in the traditional Orthodox countries such as Greece, Cyprus, or Romania, animals are better treated than in the non-Orthodox West. Indeed, the contrary is regrettably true. We Orthodox need to kneel down before the animals and to ask their forgiveness for all the evils that we inflict on them. I've concentrated here upon the positive elements in the Orthodox teaching about animals, but we shouldn't ignore the many ways in which we fall short of our pastoral responsibility towards the living creatures, domestic and wild, that God has given us to be our companions. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny, says Jesus, yet not one of them will fall to the ground without the Father's will. Not one of them. God's care for his creation, his love for all the things that he's made, is not merely an abstract and generalized love. He cares for each particular creature, for every individual sparrow. But of course, Jesus goes on to say, you humans, are of more value than many sparrows. Every living thing has its unique value in God's sight. But at the same time, we dwell in a hierarchical universe. And some living things have a greater value than others. Now, this idea of hierarchy, that we live in an ordered universe with different levels, is clear in the account of creation. in the first chapter of Genesis. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." Yes, humans are entrusted by the Creator with authority over the animals. Yet this God-given dominion does not signify an arbitrary and tyrannical domination. We must not overlook the explicit reason that is given for this dominion. It is because we are fashioned in the image and likeness of God. That is to say, in the exercise of our dominion over the animals, we are to show the same gentleness, the same loving compassion that God himself shows towards the whole of his creation. Our dominion is to be God-reflective, Christ-like. How far does this dominion extend? Certainly it includes the right to use domestic animals for our service, to employ horses and oxen for ploughing, to keep cows for their milk, to breed sheep for their wool. Yet there are definite limits to what we can legitimately do. We are not to think of animals simply as instruments for our use. We are to respect their characteristic lifestyle, allowing them to be themselves. For example, we should let hens range freely. We might keep them in a yard with a fence or in a field with a hedge, but we would not restrict their movement if we are to behave in a manner that reflects the image of God. Some years ago, I was taken to a battery for hens in a monastery. It had only just been installed. The monks were immensely proud of it. I was appalled. There were these thousands of hens in a shed, each confined to a tiny cage, not able to move about, not even able to stand. Most of them had stripped off all their feathers, probably because of feeling of irritation that was produced by living in these intolerable little prisons. And they had the blazing lights coming down from the roof day and night. The hens were not allowed any night because exposing them to light all the time might increase the amount of eggs that they produced. Now that shows to me exactly what we should not do. And I was the more appalled that a monastery, which surely should have a sense of the holiness of God's creation, should with such pride have installed this awful prison camp. Yes, we may use the animals, but not misuse them. Domestic animals, horses, for example, we should keep them clean. We should keep them warm in winter. We should give them enough to eat. We should not exhaust them by imposing excessively heavy loads on them. We should let them rest. Domestic animals, if they are treated in a way that respects their natural lifestyle, can, I think, be quite happy and contented. We don't have to inflict pain on them in order to use them for our own purposes. Does our dominion over the animals entitle us to kill and eat them? Here I'm moving into a delicate area. In my church, the Orthodox Church, as in other Christian communities, serious grounds of conscience refrain from eating animals. But the Orthodox Church as such is not in principle vegetarian. The normal teaching is that animals may indeed be killed and used for food, so long as this killing is done humanely and not wantonly. It is true that in traditional Orthodox monasteries, meat is not eaten in the refectory. Fish, however, is allowed. It's also true that in Lent and at certain other seasons of the year, all Orthodox Christians, whether monastics or those in the world, are expected, so far as they can, to abstain, yes, from meat, fish, and animal products. Yet this is not because we consider the eating of animals to be in itself sinful, but because such fasting has disciplinary values, assisting us in our prayer and our spiritual growth. In the Gospels, it is said that Christ ate fish. In the account in St. Luke of the appearance of Christ after the resurrection, it is recorded, they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate before them. The point there was to make it clear that he was really present in his body, not just a ghost. And since Christ observed the Passover, presumably he also ate meat, the Paschal lamb. In the lives of Eastern Christian saints, as among the saints of the West, especially in the Celtic tradition, there are numerous stories, well authenticated in many cases, of close fellowship between the animals and holy men and women. Such accounts are not to be dismissed as sentimental fairy tales, for they have a definite theological significance. The mutual understanding between animals and saints recalls the situation before the fall, when the two lived at peace in paradise, and it points forward to the transfiguration of the cosmos at the end of time. In the words of St. Isaac the Syrian, the humble person approaches the wild animals, and the moment they catch sight of him, their ferocity is tamed. They come up and cling to him as to their master, wagging their tails and licking his hands, for they smell on him the same smell that came from Adam before the transgression. Not that the mutual understanding between holy men and wild animals has always been complete. There is, for example, a story in the sayings of the Desert Fathers about an unsociable lion. There was a certain old man, a solitary, who lived near the river Jordan, and going into a cave because of the midday heat, he found there a lion. The lion began to gnash his teeth and to roar. The old man said to him, "What is annoying you? There's plenty of room here for both of us. If you don't like it, get up and go away." The story ends, but the lion, not taking it well, left and went outside. Perhaps there were occasions of other old men who found lions in caves but didn't live to tell the tale. Many of the 20th century stories about humans and animals come from the holy mountain of Athos, chief center of Orthodox monasticism. I recall one such story told me many years ago. The monks in a small hermitage, as they prayed in the early morning, were much disturbed by the croaking of frogs in the cistern outside their chapel. The spiritual father of the community went out and addressed them. "Frogs, we've just finished the midnight office and are about to start matins. Would you mind keeping quiet until we've finished?" To which the frogs replied, "We've just finished matins and are about to start the first hour. Would you mind keeping quiet until we've finished?" Let me tell you a story of my own experience on the Holy Mountain. When I was staying in the Serbian monastery of Kilandar, it was my custom around the middle of the day, when all the monks were resting, to go out for a walk. It was still spring, so it was not too hot. My walk would always start going down a particular path with walls on either side. And there, in the middle of the path, I met a snake about 10 feet long. He looked at me, but showed no inclination to move. So I said to him, "Would you please mind moving aside?" And then I banged with my staff on the ground. Thereupon, he disappeared in a crevice of the wall. I walked past. Immediately behind me, I heard swish. Out he came. Immediately I passed to sit again in the sun. The second day, I found the same snake in the same place. This time I only said, "Please, could you move aside?" And I didn't bang on the ground. And he complied. Off he went into the wall. Out he came as soon as I'd passed. The third day, there he was again, and he looked at me as if to say, "You again?" But I didn't have to say, "Please move aside." I didn't have to bang on the ground. He disappeared into the wall without any further ado. Now, I am urban by upbringing, and if I, in that comparatively short time, could establish a common feeling with this snake, surely others born and brought up in the countryside would have a far closer relationship with the animals around them. We shouldn't be too quick to dismiss them. I don't find the croaking of frogs at all offensive. I think it's a beautiful sound. Sometimes sitting in the evening on the Holy Mountain, looking out over the sea at the setting sun, I will hear the frogs all round me. This is particularly the case in the settlement of St. Anna, where the monks don't live in a single building, but they're scattered about in cottages. And each cottage has its own cistern, and each cistern has its own community of frogs. So first I hear the frogs singing far below, then I hear them singing high above, then I hear them singing on either side, until the whole evening air is full of the frog-like harmony. I know a few sounds so moving and beautiful. Compassion for animals is vividly expressed in the writings of a recent 20th century Athonite saint, the Russian monk Silkworms. The Lord, he says, bestows such rich grace on his chosen ones that they embrace the whole earth, the whole world within their love. One day I saw a dead snake on my path, which had been chopped into pieces, and each piece writhed convulsively. And I was filled with pity for every living creature, every suffering thing in creation, and I wept bitterly before God. Such is in truth the compassionate love that we are called to express towards the animals. All too often they are innocent sufferers, and we should view this undeserved suffering with compunction and sympathy. What harm have they done to us that we should inflict pain and distress upon them? As living beings, sensitive and easily hurt, they are to be viewed as a thou, not an it, to use Martin Buber's terminology. Not as objects to be exploited and manipulated, but as subjects capable of joy and sorrow, of happiness and affliction. They are to be approached with gentleness and tenderness, and more than that, with respect and reverence, for they are precious in God's sight. As William Blake affirmed, everything that lives is holy.